Good morning, everyone. Come on. Look, I was born in North Yorkshire. I know people from Yorkshire say good morning to each other. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Welcome to York's 3-minute thesis competition. Can I see a show of hands? Who has been here before? Who's been here twice? 3 times? 4? 5? Excellent. You will get your star at the end. I'm James. I will be your host today, taking you through events, and I'm doing a little talk in the middle. I'm delighted to be here to present the 3-minute thesis competition. How wonderful that the University of York has the opportunity to show off all the brilliant things it does and all of its wonderful PhD students. I love coming to days like this. It makes me very proud to be an alumni here. Before we get going, I've got a few instructions for us to go through. There is a single static PowerPoint. No slide transitions, no animations on movement of any description. Contestants, are you ready? Good. Good gladiators joke there for a certain generation of followers. No additional electronics, no media, no props. Do not exceed 3 minutes, otherwise you will be disqualified permanently. Presentations are in spoken words, no poems or songs. They have commenced when you begin your speech, and the decision of the adjudicating panel is final. All clear? Great. Audience. No unwanted audience participation. I'm not sure what wanted participation from the audience is, but let's say no participation. Mobile phones, off. And there is a people's choice vote. So get ready to place your vote after the presentations. There'll be a Mentimeter where you can scan it on your phone and vote, or else there'll be paper ballots as well. There are 2 criteria. How do you judge the comprehension and content of our speakers? And how do you judge their engagement and communications? And we have the judging panel. We have Professor Paul Wakelin. Paul, can you give us a wave? Hi, Paul. Jack Stenning. Jack, you've done this all before. Dr. Amy Newman. Amy. Hi, Amy. Joanne Cross. Hiya. And Professor Mariana Lopez. Hello. These are the people you have to impress, contestants. Next slide. So the prize. First prize is an iPad. Second prize, 150 quid of Amazon vouchers. Third prize, £75 in Amazon vouchers. And a prize you cannot put a value on, except also £75 in Amazon vouchers, the People's Choice Award. Plus, the winner of the University of York gets to take part in the national semi-final. And I'm led to believe the University of York has a pretty good record of getting to semi-finals and finals. So, you are representing your county here. If our first speaker could come up, we have Sarah Wood from the Department of Philosophy, Unveiling Dementia's Lived Reality, a Philosophical Investigation. Can we have an applause for Sarah, please?
I'd like to ask you to close your eyes and imagine that you're at home. Chances are, for most of you, this brings about feelings of comfort, safety, familiarity. You may instantly start to relax as you feel the sofa beneath you, see your possessions around you, a family member next to you. All of these reflections of the life you've lived, the identity you possess. Now open your eyes. All of a sudden, none of this means anything to you. You don't recognize the pictures of yourself and your family up on the walls. The room you're in looks strange and unfamiliar, yet somehow screams at you that you should recognize it. So, why don't you? In my PhD research, I found that this is one of many common experiences had by people with dementia as their illness progresses. Dementia is an incurable condition which involves symptoms like memory loss, confusion, and problems with thinking and understanding. It's currently the leading cause of death in the UK, and yet we still understand incredibly little about what it's actually like to live with it, to have experiences like this. This is where my research comes in, drawing upon philosophical methods which seek to illuminate the structure of human experience. I analysed the testimonies of people with dementia themselves in order to provide a much-needed, better understanding of their lived reality. One such person whose memoir I've examined is the late Wendy Mitchell, who suffered from Alzheimer's disease. In her memoir, she describes how frightening it is to suddenly not recognize your surroundings, to be cut off from any sense of home. She remarks, "It wasn't just confusion, it was a complete blank, a black hole. Where am I?" she asks. And she searches her environment for clues, trying to find answers, but sadly, this doesn't always yield results. So, is there nothing we can do to prevent people with dementia from slipping more and more into this black hole that Mitchell describes as their illness progresses? I say there is. By providing a rigorous and comprehensive overview of what it's actually like to have experiences like this, we can begin to provide a more person-centered framework for their care, one that's better tailored to their needs in virtue of the experiences that they describe. I believe that by understanding the lived reality of the more than 1 million people in the UK who suffer from dementia, we can begin to pull them out of the black hole and help them to find a way home. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Next up, we have Ruth Helen Fasalas, Spiritually Awakened, Now What? The Aftermath of Life-Changing Spiritual Experiences. Ruth.
What happens when an experience shatters everything you thought you knew? This happened to Anna, an academic who had a near-death experience and found she could exist outside her body. It happened to Laura, a NASA scientist who in a moment felt connected to everything with no boundaries between body and environment. It happened to Luke, a researcher who didn't believe in God until he had an experience of the divine on psychedelic mushrooms. These are spiritual awakenings, and they challenge what science says is possible. Yet research suggests that 1 in 4 people in this room may have had one. But when our society lacks frameworks to understand these events, experiencers are left silently wondering, what does this mean? Who can I tell? And now what? My PhD studies the aftermath of these life-changing spiritual events in Western contexts. I don't study whether these experiences are real, but rather how people live with what they've experienced. I analyzed dozens of in-depth interviews and questionnaire responses to see how people integrate the supernatural into the everyday. Here's what I found. It all starts with the body. People must make sense of bodily experiences that go beyond our 5 normal senses. It's both exciting and scary. So they manage their bodies in ways to stay grounded in the physical, while also open to more transcendence. Relating to others becomes hard. The experience feels sacred, and yet they fear being seen as mentally ill. The world becomes divided between those who get it and those who don't, and they are careful about who they tell. Because of that, people turn to books. Books become the guides, the mentors, the community that society lacks. So how people understand this radical change is just human. Whether it's a spiritual awakening or getting a serious health diagnosis or parenthood, we're all learning how to fit new selves into shifting worlds. My PhD asks all of us and our institutions to stay open and curious to experiences that seem different or even impossible. Because what I've found in my research is that that is what helps people to rebuild their world and to find belonging when everything else feels changed. Thank you.
Excellent timekeeping so far, everybody. Next up, we have Rosario Nera, beyond requests. Rosario, when you're ready.
You all know the image. A student sticks their hand up and clearly asks, "Can you help me?" It is simple, it is effective, and according to my research, it basically never happens. For my thesis, I study adult learners in craft workshops, places where people voluntarily come to learn hands-on skills like sewing, woodwork, and ceramics. You might imagine that when someone gets stuck, they get the attention of the instructor. They're paying to help them and request the assistance that they need. Would it then surprise you to learn that in 400 cases of learners in difficulty, I only found 10 clear direct requests? I did this by using a method called conversation analysis, a method that looks incredibly closely at how people actually interact in real time in the real world. By analysing video recordings of craft workshops, I could see when learners needed help and how instructors stepped in. Most learners don't ask questions. In fact, they often don't even address the instructor. So what do they do instead? They show difficulty by pausing, frowning, and repeatedly and unsuccessfully attempting a task. These are called embodied displays of trouble. They often come before any verbal signs, and they provide the instructor with an early opportunity to step in if they're paying attention. When learners speak, it is rarely to ask a question, but rather to make a statement like, "Oh, mine doesn't look right." That is a trouble report, a description of a problem or difficulty without asking anyone to solve it. In my study, trouble reports were the most common spoken method for getting help, and they were just as likely to receive a response as questions. So what's going on? These embodied displays and trouble reports do a lot of heavy lifting in learning environments, and they form a natural part of the classroom dynamic. After all, it can be intimidating to ask a question when you're not an expert in the subject, and simply describing what you're struggling with can feel so much easier. In fact, instructors themselves see this as an expected part of their role and responsibilities, and often pick up on these cues and offer help. My research provides new insights into how help is recruited in classrooms, and can provide instructors with a framework for identifying students who are struggling. By looking carefully at what students do and how instructors might effectively respond, we can create more responsive and inclusive teaching practices. Practices that account for a lack of clarity or confidence that are a natural part of being a student. Next time you find yourself in a learning space, look out for help that doesn't come with a raised hand or a question. You might just see it happening beyond requests.
Thank you, Rosario. Next up, we have Peter Mwangi, Smarter Energy Decisions Powering a Greener Future. Peter, when you're ready.
Our climate is changing. Temperatures are rising faster and faster. And 2024 was the hottest year on record. And this is the crux of the matter, that 75% of greenhouse gas emissions come from the energy sector. This is what makes the transition from fossil fuels to sustainable alternatives such as wind and solar urgent. This transition will require massive investments, and making those decisions is not straightforward. Let me explain. Imagine you have a mobile phone that is old and unreliable, and you've decided you need to replace it. But you also know that there's a new model, improved, with better features, that will be launched 3 months from now. Do you buy the phone now, or do you wait for the upgraded version? That problem of not just what to buy, but when, is central in energy investments. People making energy investments need to decide, do I invest immediately, or do I wait for better technology in the form of cheaper batteries or more efficient solar panels coming next year? invest too early and you lock yourself in with inferior technology that is more expensive and less reliable. Wait too long and it may be too late to avert disaster. My research brings mathematics to bear on this problem. A typical day finds me at my desk, working with pen and paper, writing down equations that help us to put a value on the option of waiting or acting. And then I turn to my computer and run a series of simulations with the intention of determining just when the value of taking action overtakes the value of waiting. That is the right time to make the investment. Not sooner and not later, because timing matters. Mathematics may not build wind turbines, but it can give us the tools to make wise and timely choices, saving ourselves and this planet that we call home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Next up, we have Morgan Batiste Sims, From Sweet to Sour, Sugars Misbehaving in Health and Disease. Morgan.
A global incidence of 1 in 5,000 individuals. Now, without any prior context, that sentence might not hold very much weight to you. But in fact, it's a statistic that relates to a hereditary disorder that occurs from birth. And to give you even more context, that's more than the current population of the country of Estonia. Now, this hereditary disorder is a direct result of when sugars misbehave in health and disease. Now, when I say sugars, you might be thinking of the sweet treat that you're looking forward to after dinner, or the nice fancy syrups that you dress your coffees in. Sugars that add nutritional value. But in fact, the sugars that I study in particular have no regards for nutritional value. They're independent of what you put in your body. These sugars, the ones that are born with you, affect your immune health, your immune system, your reproductive facilities, or in this case, what I'm interested in, the disease state, muscular dystrophy. Now you might be wondering, what is muscular dystrophy? Well, it's the atrophying or degradation of muscles. So if you're an individual who suffers from chronic management of muscular dystrophy, if you have this muscle wasting away and tearing in your limbs, you might be wheelchair bound for the rest of your life. However, in extreme cases, for example, if you have that muscle wasting in your heart, your cardiac muscles, you'd actually have decreased life expectancy. This is the drive that powers my PhD and the purpose of my thesis. I, as a chemist, go in the lab and I make sugars that mimic the natural misbehaving ones in your body. Let's think about a muscle cell as a factory. There's a lot going on. There's assembly lines that are going on in tandem. We can't observe everything at the same time. You'll hear scientists say that all the time. I want to observe a protein of interest. Well, that's where my job comes in. I make these sugars and I give them badges so that when they're in that factory, I can pick, choose, and refuse where they get to go. And if something's going wrong and they're in a crisis, I can freeze them and see where are the abundance of these workers? What are they doing? What's going wrong when these sugars are misfolding? Because in health research, in order to create drug therapeutics, you have to know where the problem is in order to find the solution. And now, it might be a lofty goal for some to say, but my goal as a chemist and my goal with these badges to monitor these workers is to be able to come up to someone and say, yes, I'm a chemist and my research is muscular dystrophy, a previously incurable disease. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. We are now halfway through onto our sixth speaker. I believe 12 is a record for this event due to the high standards of everyone taking part. We now have Mahmood Metwali, Bone Builders, Super Stem Cells, and the Future of Healing. Mahmood.
Have any of us here broken a bone before? Most of us actually have. In fact, 50% of children go through at least one bone fracture before turning 18. And it's not just the youngsters. Did any of you hear about osteoporosis? That's a condition affecting millions of older people where their bones become fragile and they break easily, costing the UK over £4 billion to treat. Now, it's not all miserable. If you look at my slide, our body has a natural repair crew called stem cells. And through some switches, actually, let's talk about those switches later on. Those stem cells can change into bone cells, rebuilding what's been damaged. But as we get older, the number of stem cells we have are lowered, making bones heal slower, and for those with osteoporosis, their bones might not heal at all. Now, you might be wondering what researchers like myself are doing about this. I study how stem cells change into bone cells. But typical stem cells take weeks to change. They require heavy chemical stimulation, and they do so in a very unnatural way. In my research, I work with the supercharged stem cells. They can change into bone cells very quickly, with less chemical stimulation, and they do so in a more natural way. Now, you might be wondering what is so special about my stem cells. It boils down to genes. Do you remember those switches I talked about earlier? Well, think of genes as tiny switches inside the cell. And with thousands of them being turned on or turned off, they give the cell its identity. And as my stem cells change into bone cells, their identity changes. And I was able to capture those changes. I found that cytokines such as interleukins, interferons, you probably might not have heard about those molecules. But what you have heard of is our immune system, our body's defense system. Those molecules are very important for the immune system. And apparently, they're involved in bone healing. That's new knowledge. That opens up new targets for bone medicines. Now, just imagine being able to return to your favorite sport within weeks rather than months after a serious bone injury. Imagine our grandparents being able to garden without the fear of breaking a bone. That is the future of bone healing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahmood. Next up, we have Lily Parsons, Belonging Shapes Belief, Why We Trust Misinformation. Lily, when you're ready.
Who remembers this big red bus? That was the reaction I was expecting. But does anybody not remember it? Plastered across the side in huge letters, it says, "We send the EU £350 million a week. Let's fund our NHS instead." Sounds like a convincing argument, right? Except it wasn't the whole truth. But by the time the fact checks had come out, it didn't matter. Everybody already had an opinion, and the truth had become less important than this feeling it had created. Now, I am not here to talk about politics, but we're all on social media, and we see how fast misinformation spreads. The question is, why do we believe it? This is what I study now in my PhD, the psychology of misinformation. Specifically, I look at how our social identities are influencing what we believe. But what do I mean by social identity? Well, imagine everybody in this room was wearing a name tag, but instead of your name, it said things like psychologist, teacher, dad, Muslim, Arsenal fan. These labels tell us about the groups we belong to and help us categorize ourselves and others in this complex world. When we share the same labels as other people, we're similar to them and we tend to trust them more. But when those labels are different, we can tend to trust them less. And this makes sense, right? But in the context of misinformation, it's not really something that's been researched much. So I set out to review all of the studies on this topic, and the results were astounding to me. In every single study, I found that identity mattered. Specifically, I found that when we share identity with the content of a post or the person posting it, we are then more likely to believe it, whether it contains true
or false information. And on the flip side of that, when we don't share our identity, we are then less likely to believe it. Interestingly, though, I did find that the majority of these studies focused only on political identity, and that's problematic. Because think of yourselves, our identities aren't just made up of one single factor. They're complex, they're multidimensional, and they change over time. All of that is influencing what we believe. Everybody in the world is wearing rose-tinted glasses, with social identity colouring our perceptions of truth. I hope my talk has shown you today that fighting misinformation isn't just about pointing out what's wrong. It's about understanding why it feels so right. Don't let this big red bus distract you from who's in the driver's seat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lily. Next up, we have Jenny Cudmore, Trees versus Tsunamis, Mangrove Forests as a Defence Against Tsunamis. Jenny, when you're ready.
I'd like for you all to imagine 2 women who lived in Thailand in 2004. On Boxing Day of that year, the most devastating tsunami in human history hit their shorelines. The first woman, shown at the top, lived near a mangrove forest, and with their tangled roots and branches, the trees were able to defend her village from the tsunami. The second woman, shown at the bottom, lived in an area which used to be surrounded by mangrove trees. However, recent deforestation left her house exposed and unguarded. And when that tsunami hit, it left devastation in its path. Coastal communities have planted and maintained mangrove forests to defend against storms and tsunamis for generations. And survivors from this tsunami stated that these trees being stripped away was the reason that so many lives were lost. In my thesis, I create numerical models of mangrove trees defending against tsunamis. On a computer, I set up virtual mangrove trees and then create waves to send towards those trees. I can even build houses on the other side to see whether or not the trees will defend them. I can design the forest in any way that I choose, positioning the trees in different patterns or even by experimenting with different species of mangrove. Is it best to have a forest with only the very tallest trees, or with a mix of tall trees and shorter vegetation? When thinking about your forest layout, should you have your trees planted in structured rows or in a more random, natural configuration? You need to run a model to find that out. My actual model consists of many files, each containing code to describe different aspects. For example, the height of your wave, the slope of the beach, or the width of the trees. You can play around with each variable, trying to make it look as realistic as possible. Although this does mean you can sometimes spend a lot of time just trying to get your water to act like water. I've logged in before to find that I've set the turbulence far too high, and all the water has become very sticky, and I've created an ocean of honey rather than a tsunami. Or that the wave has run perfectly fine, but then all the water has started to slide mysteriously off the sides of the beach into some sort of black hole. Because these models are so big, I send them to a supercomputer in Sweden, where they can take several days to run. When they're done, I can make figures like the ones shown on the right. Here, the vertical blue line shows where the trees actually are, and each frame as you go down shows us how the wave changes as it travels through time. The redder the wave is, the faster it's going. So you can see by the final frame just how much slower the wave is actually traveling, just by going through the trees. The world is already changing due to the climate emergency, and tsunamis like the one shown in 2004 will come again. But my model allows us to prepare, and by planting mangroves, next time, both women can be protected.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Next up, we have Isabel Standen. AI lacks common sense, and it shows. Whenever you're ready.
With the rise of AI systems such as ChatGPT, mundane tasks like replying to emails, schedule planning, and even coming up with new and interesting ideas for what to cook for dinner are becoming far easier. However, when an AI suggests that one way to make your cooking more aromatic is by adding bleach, there is understandably some cause for concern at the system's complete lack of awareness of what this entails. Any human with common sense would immediately recognize the potentially harmful, if not fatal, consequences that could arise as a result of this suggestion. However, so-called artificially intelligent systems have no capacity for common sense. As a result, they lack an understanding of why errors such as these are so problematic, meaning they are far more likely to repeat them. So, AI needs some common sense. But there's a problem. Although intuitive to most of us, it's not always entirely clear what counts as common sense, or how everyone comes to view these things as just being obvious. What is considered common sense changes over time depending on your location and even what social groups you're a part of. So how can we endow AI with common sense if we don't even know what it actually is? In my research, I analyse insights from our current and emerging understanding of human common sense and argue that one of the key reasons why these systems are prone to error is because of their lack of this type of understanding. Humans gain common sense by experiencing the world and being a part of a community. We use our common sense to make decisions when faced with uncertainty, ensuring that we act appropriately and safely. AI, on the other hand, does not experience the world or gain knowledge the way that we do, and these systems often struggle with situations they've not been trained for or previously encountered. A number of self-driving cars have slammed on the brakes or even crashed as a result of detecting a pedestrian that was really just a movie poster on the side of a bus. Therefore, it's this seemingly obvious understanding of the way the world works that is crucial to successful functioning. And AI systems lacking this capacity often make unexplainable and unpredictable errors. If given some capacity for common sense, these systems would be better equipped to identify and overcome errors, making them more reliable and ultimately safer for use. Thank you.
Just a brief 5-second interlude. Thank you so much, Isabel. Next, we have Greg McNeil, Sugar-Coated Secrets, Making Bacterial Sugars Glow. Greg, when you're ready.
The World Health Organization has estimated that between 2025 and 2050, 39 million people will die globally from antibiotic-resistant related diseases. 39 million. That equates to 3 deaths every minute for the next 25 years. As bacteria continue to develop resistance to modern antibiotics, we're struggling to keep up with the demand for new treatments. Now, bacteria are microscopic organisms that are so small we cannot see them with our naked eye, but they live all around us. We can find them in water, in soil, on surfaces, and even on and in our own bodies. Some bacteria are helpful and help keep us healthy, whilst others, they're not so nice and can cause serious, sometimes fatal infections. For example, MRSA and hospital-acquired infections. Now, one specific group of bacteria I study in the lab are called gram-positive bacteria. Now, these guys have a thick protective outer layer that helps protect them from their environment and from antibiotic treatments. Good for them, right? A specific part of this protective layer is made up of sugar-based molecules, strung together in long chains. You can think of these like long hair-like projections that extend out from the bacteria. These sugar molecules help bacteria latch onto other surfaces, to talk to other bacteria, and to maintain the integrity of the cell, as well as defending against antibiotic treatments. Now, the importance of these structures has made them important targets for new developing antibiotics, but there's a problem. Scientists currently lack the tools to closely and directly study these structures, especially in living cells. That's where my research comes in. With my PhD, I have developed a new set of chemical tools that allow us to closely and directly study these structures in bacteria. In the chemistry lab, I can synthesize sugar molecules and install a tag. You can think of these like glow-in-the-dark flags. I can then take that modified sugar molecule and feed it to bacteria, which will eat it up just as it would the natural sugar. However, with these glow-in-the-dark tags installed, I can then use high-power microscopes and lasers to make these sugars glow under special light. For example, the bacteria glowing here. This allows us to track where these sugars go within cells, and we can study where they go, how they move, how they're made, and how they function. By being better able to understand how these sugars function and how they work and how they're formed, we're better able to target them for new developing antibiotics. By developing new antibiotics, we can help solve the issue of antibiotic resistance and save some of those 39 million lives. Because if we can know the enemy better, maybe, just maybe, we'll stay one step ahead of antibiotic resistance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg. Next up, we have Charlotte Titterington-Coleman. Are stem cells from every bone the same?
Stem cells, like the one with the question mark above it on the screen, have the ability to turn into a range of different types of cells as needed, like the blood cells shown beneath. They allow us, like shapeshifters do in the films, to be able to heal and recover from injuries as needed. My research is focused on the blood-producing stem cells in our bone marrow. They help us to produce our red blood cells that help to carry oxygen, and our white blood cells to help fight infections. And you may know someone who's had a bone marrow sample taken, either for diagnosing a condition or potentially for a transplant to treat the condition. We always take these samples from the hip, regardless of the condition we're trying to diagnose or treat. But is that always the best option? And my research can start to provide the answer to that question. So my research project is looking at comparing whether stem cells taken from the hip respond the same way to stem cells taken from the thigh. And do they respond the same way to the inflammatory signals that we release in response to infections and injuries? And this is because previous research has started to show that the bone from which the stem cell was collected can really actually matter in terms of what cells they end up producing. For example, the skull, when exposed to blood loss, won't increase blood cell production, even though all other bones in the body do massively increase red blood cell production to compensate for all the blood that we have lost. And this is a really interesting topic to follow. So I first wanted to find out whether the proportions of different types of blood cells were the same in each bone. So I stained the bone marrow of each bone with coloured tags to allow me to determine what types of cells were present. And through these experiments, I was able to find that the bone between your hand and your elbow is able to produce fewer macrophages than all other bones in the body. And I described macrophages as Pac-Man immune cells, hence the diagram on the screen. And this is because they're able to engulf entire infectious agents, like bacterium, just like Pac-Man eats Pac-Dots on the screen. And this could be because this bone is less responsive to infection and inflammation. And it's really exciting to study because it's the next stage of my project. I've been able to compare the responses of the hip and the thigh bone to those inflammatory signals. And the hip does produce different types of cells to the thigh bone in response to those signals. And these stem cells are exactly the same as far as we know. So we don't know why this is possible. And this could matter for everybody that needs a bone marrow transplant or a bone marrow sample taken for diagnosis, because it's a potentially simple switch that could potentially save lives if we take a bone sample from a different bone based on the condition that we're suspecting in that person, allow them to live better and happier, longer lives. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. And our final speaker, Alexandra de Beck. Which one is it? Identifying the guilty immune cell. Alexandra, when you're ready.
Is there any organ more vital than the heart? From the moment we're born, it beats tirelessly, delivering life-giving oxygen to every cell in our body. It's no wonder, then, that cardiac issues place such a heavy burden on our society. At times, cardiac problems can be caused by certain infections. Chagas heart disease, a neglected tropical disease caused by tiny parasites, is the leading cause of infectious heart disease worldwide, with 8 million people being infected, mainly in Latin America. The most striking feature of Chagas heart disease is the accumulation of immune cells in the hearts of infected individuals. Normally, immune cells are like the body's personal army, always ready to fight off invaders, such as parasites. In this case, they are thought to directly contribute to heart damage. But how come it's the immune cells? Aren't they supposed to be the guardians of our body? Well, in Chagas heart disease, the parasite sticks around for life, keeping the immune system on high alert. Over time, this constant state of defense wears the heart down. It's like having guards who never go off duty. They start damaging the very place they're supposed to protect. At first, it seems simple. Immune cells are causing the heart damage. Case closed, right? Well, not quite. The issue is that there are many different types of immune cells. The real mystery is figuring out which one is doing the most harm. Maybe then we could stop it? This is where my PhD thesis comes in. During my PhD, I am using various laboratory and bioinformatic techniques to unravel the mystery of the suspected, guilty immune cell. In my project, I use heart tissues and look at both, the damage that happened to these hearts and the immune cells that are present in them. Then I try to relate this information together. By doing this, I have discovered that some types of immune cells appear in the injured hearts more than others. Now, I am trying to understand which one is doing the most harm and how. Identifying the guilty cell could be the breakthrough that we need, not just to understand the damage, but to find real ways to decrease or even reverse heart damage in Chagas heart disease that affects millions worldwide.
Thank you, Alexandra, and perfect timing on that one. Friends, that's it. How fortunate we are to have a university like this one with such brilliant people doing such amazing things. Could we have a round of applause for everyone who took part today? Thank you. So, two things are going to happen now. There should be a link to a Mentimeter coming up. Excellent. Where you can scan it and vote. If you cannot scan by electronic means, there are also paper ballots. Dominic, where have they been handed out from? Excellent, which are now going to be handed out if you need one. So could you put your hand up if you require a paper ballot, please? Thank you. Hello again. Hiya. Hello, 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 hello. Right, so we now have about 10 minutes until the judges make their big decision. And no pressure, but after seeing 12 of the best talks I've ever seen, I was asked to fill 10 minutes on something I'm interested in. And you know what? Of all the things in my life I am proud of, I am most proud of being Northern. And I've got a daughter, I've got a wonderful job, a family member of mine is in the audience, but being Northern is number one. You have never lived until you've seen the sunlight reflect in the tees from Mima. The North, it is York, it is Newcastle, it is Liverpool, it is Manchester, it is the Smiths, it is Joy Division, it is Newcastle United League Cup Winners Football Club. I love the Angel of the North, I love our friends in the North, I love North by Northwest, which of course is not even set in the North. I have a racing pigeon tattoo. I love the North so much. Out of interest, put your hand up if you think I'm joking. We'll find out at the end. And because I love the North so much, I am defensive about it. There is a book called The North and Almost Everything in It. The book is 600 pages long, which even then is simply a canter through our great place. And it begins with this premise. That all change begins with someone having a thought. And the thought of the North begins with the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution comes out of Manchester, 1780s onwards, up until about end of the 1800s, depending where you choose to draw the line. And the Industrial Revolution's main thesis is this. You bring technology, people, raw materials together, and the economy gets larger. This from the World Bank is a measure of GDP over time. And to put it into context, there was more economic growth between 1750 and 1800 than from the birth of Jesus Christ up until 1750. The Industrial Revolution gave a different way in which we organise society. It is the thing that drove economies, it is the thing that changed living standards forever, with some horrendous consequences of doing so. Let us not skip over that. But it is the birthplace of the nation as we know it today, and it is the story of the North. The story of class politics and the way our society is organised is the story of the Industrial Revolution. However, with the Industrial Revolution come some challenges. Life is short, conditions are hard, children are working, and what once bound agricultural societies together is ripped apart under the guise of economic progress. You may recognise this plan of the city of York. This was originally part of a study by Seabaum Rowntree, who looked into the working conditions of people in the Industrial Revolution. Through his various work and his philanthropic endeavours, he looked at working hours, provisions of pensions, weekends, what we now recognise as the modern working conditions back in the 1900s. Anyone recognise this desk? No, because why would you? It's a desk. Chetham's Library, Manchester, one of the oldest learning libraries in the world, where Karl Marx and Engels sat around writing their big ideas around the Communist Manifesto. Engels spent part of his life there writing a survey of the working classes. And I'm struck by one of the things that he said. He said, the English bourgeois is charitable, but in self-interest. It gives nothing outright, but regards its gifts as business. The mere matter of doing so makes a bargain with the poor in saying, if I spend this much upon benevolent institutions, they purchase the right not to be troubled any further, and you are bound thereby to stay in your dusky holes, and not to irritate my tender nerves by exposing me to your misery. I am not interested in the people who want to describe the history of the North or describe what the North should have done to it or the people who work there. I'm interested in Northerners and Northernness and the things they did. There is a wonderful book by a fellow called Pete Brown called Clubland that looks at the history of working men's clubs. Out of interest, is anyone here a member of a working man's club? Could you put your hand up? I know one person is because I'm related to him. Anyway, at their peak, and keep in mind women were not allowed to be members of working men's clubs up until the early 2000s, late 90s, around 1 in every 16 adults was a member of a working men's club. For those who are not familiar with them, they're like cooperative pubs, basically, where you just decide to be a member. They came into existence as a reaction to the temperance movement of the Victorians to educate the working classes. From there came fishing clubs, football clubs, libraries, readings, and work. The reason they became so popular is when Parliament passed a law to allow private gentlemen's clubs to exist, they inadvertently allowed working men's clubs to exist as well, because they are private clubs. The only reason the working classes were given the permission in which to organise their own affairs was by a mistake in drafting. Moving on from the Industrial Revolution. We arrive in the 30s in a very different world in the North. For those who have read The Road to Wigan Pier by George Orwell, he travels around Wigan meeting families and talking about what he saw there. And at the quote at the top, I'm struck when he talks of the petty inconvenience and indignity of being kept waiting about. The experience of the 30s for many Northerners was hard work. It was industrial decline. And it was the sense, as he says on the bottom, that we are waiting for someone to do something to us. In The Road to Wigan Pier Revisited, very much in his title there, Stephen Armstrong, he goes again to Wigan, and he looks 75 years later. And I cannot help but be struck by the similarities decades and decades apart. Whereas George Orwell talks about the passivity and the hard work, Stephen Armstrong is talking about the difficulties of parenthood. How this mother who is trying her best has to choose from £108 a week of the gas or the electric. The North has changed in many ways, but it is still the case that it feels like it is not fair, or we are not getting our fair share. And we fast forward to the 90s. Look how cute that baby is. Yeah, he is, isn't he? That's me, 1995. You can tell, because I'm wearing denim and playing on liner. I was going to be like, oh, we didn't have toys in our house, we played with a washing machine. That isn't true. And there's some family members of mine in the 70s. I shan't point out which one's my dad, but I will make the case that some of the people in that photograph are only 21. I have no idea what was going on in Britain in the 70s, that 21-year-olds were coming out with full moustaches and calves like tree trunks. But that is the case. But the case I want to make is that the story of the Industrial Revolution through to the 30s, through up until this period in the 90s, is effectively the same. Communities organised around industry that gives them an identity, that gives them an income. But this doesn't hold. And it doesn't hold for two reasons. One is industrial decline. I say enormous and rapid scale. My brother, who was born in 1982, was born at a time where around 100,000 people were working in coal mining in Britain. By the time I was born in 1993, and I know I don't look old enough, there's basically nobody. That is not just a change in economic circumstances, that is a changed country in only 11 years. And the consequences of this are profound. If you look at the share of employment in industry in the UK versus our comparator countries, we deindustrialised at a rate that no one else has seen. This wasn't just people losing their jobs. This was people losing their communities, their identities, the places where they'd organised. It was the place where people lost their dignity, where they lost the chance to go out and do real work and earn money for their families. I don't want to be Panaglossian. I think working in a coal mine was a rubbish, difficult job, and people who want to go back to that era have clearly never worked in one. But there is a serious point. Where we used to make things to the world, we just don't. Our entire economy is now based on people just selling ideas and services to each other. The difficulty is that the people who are working in coal mines in that era have now not transitioned into some of those roles. They have simply been left behind. And I would caution you that whenever you hear about politicians talking about these populist ideas of bring back manufacturing, bring back the coals, things used to be much better, it's nonsense. It's absolutely rubbish. Because it was okay unless you were a woman, or unless you were unwell, or unless you were disabled, or unless you lived in a community which no longer has those jobs because they are not coming back. And it would be the most typical thing as a northerner to do a presentation on the north that then is all gloomy. But I don't want to do that. And I want to talk about optimism. The reason why the model of the manufacturing industry no longer works is the financial crash. And if you look up until 2008 where the crash happened, the theory was, as long as you keep giving people skills, as long as you increase the population, wages will go up forever. The financial crash happened, and all of a sudden we realised that the idea of selling services to each other might not be the best idea in the long term, because once people have no cash, then clearly you can't sell anything to anymore. And I think it's worth pausing on how dramatic this shift is. From 2000 till 2008, wages were going up all the time in a steady stream. It has now been the best part of 17 years since the financial crash, and real wages, these are wages minus inflation, have not recovered. That is 17 years of people's lives. That is people who were born 2008, about to go to university next year, have never seen an increase in their real wages. It is absolutely absurd. The second problem is that this just isn't felt equally. In an interview with Harvard, Tony Blair was talking about regional inequality being a big part of his thinking. He represents a constituent in the Northeast, etc., etc. So regional policy was a big idea. I'd be more inclined to believe... Sorry, I clicked forwards there, and I meant to click backwards. I would be more inclined to believe him, except it clearly isn't true. One of the big challenges, I think, when we talk about the likes of AI, is that it is stealing white-collar jobs. The jobs in the north of England have already been hollowed out, and if we are being honest, I did not see the same level of concern. The concern we have now is the displacement of work because we did not care enough about regional policies. So what do we have, and why should we be optimistic? Throughout a period of economic difficulty, stagnation, and decline, there is one thing the north has got, and we are unbelievably good at culture. We are a fun, interesting, attractive, worthwhile place to live. And the thing about culture is, it not only reflects the world we are in, but it tells you how to understand it. Newcastle United Football Club, the greatest football team the world has ever seen, as the song goes. 52,500 people every other week go to watch League Cup winners Newcastle United Football Club. Can you think of many other countries where you get sold-out football clubs up and down the league pyramid time and time again? We are simply brilliant at it. York, in the bottom left. I spend a lot of my time talking to prospective university students, and one of the main reasons they want to move to the UK is they have a picture of the UK as being places like York. It is fun to live, it's accessible, it is quirky, it is interesting. The Angel of the North. It is an icon not only for the North but for the country. It is the standmass through which people understand where we are. Top right, Kelham Island in Sheffield. We are really, really good at drinking as a nation. And it sounds like one of those things where it's like, well, everyone's alcoholic. I'm not. But having a social space where people go out together and drink beers and spend time with each other and enjoy it, we would bloody miss it if it was gone. And it is something that we should value and cherish and support. And on the bottom right, Middlesbrough. Is anybody from Middlesbrough here? What do you mean, sort of? You live there now? So, I'll be very polite about Middlesbrough in that case. So, Middlesbrough. This is the Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art. The UK is not a very big country, either in terms of its size or its population. In places like Middlesbrough, a former industrial town in the north, one of the original ports, one of the original sort of railway depots for industry, now has one of the country's leading modern art museums. That is not by accident, that is by a choice of building on the assets that the north has. One of the things that we've proven time and time again is even when things get hard, northerners stick together and they do amazing things. And here's why I'm optimistic. Darlington, where I am from. Back in 2013, sort of 2014, had one of the lowest employment rates in the entirety of the Northeast. It now has one of the highest. And why has that happened? It has a secondary school, which is in the top 10 in the country. It has a college, which gets some of the best A-level results. It has a university campus that the University of Teesside have put in place. It has investment from government in its Treasury campus. And it has all the ingredients now to be brilliant. It is 2.5 hours from Edinburgh, 2.5 hours from London. That did not happen by accident. The government realised we have all the ingredients for Down to be brilliant. Let's stick some cash in there. The North is not held behind due to its lack of talent, due to its lack of people, due to a lack of ambition. It is held behind because people have not invested enough over time in it. Downton train stations get £170 million spent on it as well, FYI. First passenger locomotive in the world. There you go. And finally, my very last reason to be optimistic. This is the University of York. The UK is unbelievably good at higher education in a way that is not hugely appreciated. Per capita, we have unbelievable numbers of Nobel laureates. We have the highest number of universities in the top 100 rankings. We are enormous producers of research, which is the envy of the world. But it's also our universities that make our places. And I'll give you two examples. University of Liverpool, where I used to work. I was in the office one day, and a colleague comes to me and said, Jim, I've got a spreadsheet of all the instances of foot and mouth that have ever happened in the world. Do you think there's anything we could do with it? This was during COVID-19. I thought, yes, this would seem like quite a useful thing to simply have kicking about on a server somewhere. I had another colleague who was working in artificial intelligence, learning how to scan large data sets to spot patterns of communicable disease. Those two got together and simply from a spreadsheet we had kicking around on a server and a colleague who had an idea, developed the University of Liverpool Pandemic Institute. The Pandemic Institute exists to predict, prevent, and look at future pandemics. On the research they have done, they believe they'd have had over a 75% chance of predicting COVID-19. A university with a spreadsheet, an idea, and an infrastructure is able to change the world. The second example I'll give, if you look across the north, University of Manchester, University of Leeds, and York, it is not just that they are economic powerhouses who turn out research, skills, and teachers. They make their places. The University of Oxford, without the University of Oxford, would be a swamp in the southeast. The University of York, by having the University of York, is a place that brings international students, researchers, and cash. If you take nothing else from this talk, I hope it's this. As Northerners, we have an awful lot to be proud of, and our success is bound in institutions like this one. Thank you very much. I believe our esteemed judge is ready.
So thank you for bearing with us, especially to our competitors this morning. I'm Paul Wakeling. I'm Dean of York Graduate Research School, which is the umbrella body which looks after all of our research students. And it's just been such a wonderful morning for me to see the amazing talent that we've got in our research student body. I think there were 12 fantastic presentations. I mean, it's customary when you're doing judging like this to say, oh, how difficult it was to choose between everybody. But I thought for a moment we were going to have to actually have a penalty shootout to decide the winner. It is really, really close. And I think that speaks to the fantastic standard of every single one of those presentations this morning. So just before I announce the first three highest placed presentations, I wonder if we could just have a round of applause for everybody, please. Okay, now I understand there's a kind of X Factor style drum roll that's going to happen, and it's quite long, so I'm not quite sure when that starts, but I'm going to start by announcing the presentation that is in a third place, and that it's a topic that absolutely fascinates me, but this presentation, can you hear the drums? It's sort of starting very softly already, okay. Okay, so this presentation was... Oh, see, I clearly need some of the 3-minute thesis presentation training to be able to make these announcements. So this presentation, I think, had wonderful graphics. It was really engaging and well explained, and I think the judges really liked that it included something which happens a lot in postgraduate research, is that sometimes things go a bit wrong. So the third place person is Jenny Cudmore. Trees versus tsunamis. Okay, so so for the drum roll person, I'm gonna say something about the next one and then do the drum roll. Okay, so the next one, a super clear presentation, a topic. Actually, it's a topic that has affected a lot of people in the room. It hasn't affected me yet. So in second place, it's Mahmoud Metwali for Bone Builders. Okay, so we're down to the final, well, not the final award, we've still got the People's Choice to come. Woo! So the winner, the first place presentation that gets an iPad, this, again, really engaging presentation, drew the audience in right from the outset. And actually, there's a rumour going round on social media about who has won. I'm not sure if you should believe it, but maybe if it's somebody who's similar to you, you should believe it. So congratulations to Lily Parsons. Okay, so now we have the People's Choice Award winner. I don't actually know who it is. Oh, yes, you did tell me. So the People's Choice goes to Mahmoud Metwali. Oh, yes, you do, actually, yes. You get another envelope. Yes, well done. Thank you. Thank you.
I mean, well done to the winners, but can we have a round of applause again for everybody who took part in what was a wonderful competition? Right, I think that's it. So just a couple of final things. Thank you all so much for your enthusiastic and ongoing participation in these events. I've spoke to friends in the audience who've been to every single one since it started, and how wonderful that the University of York continues to put these on. And the second one is just to say that, of course, by virtue of putting it on, it takes time, commitment, cash to do it. If you can donate to the University of York, please do so. I'm very proud to be an alumni here, and I hope other people who come after our 12 wonderful contestants can access similar levels of support. Have a safe trip, thank you so much, and see you again next year.